All right, well, welcome to a new year. Oh my God, I know, I can't believe it's 2017. I hope you all enjoyed your holiday break as much as I did. But I'm really excited. The spring season here on the party line. We have a lot of newcomers to the party line, which is always a lot of fun for me. And today we have something a little different. Normally our guests are, designers who have new pattern books out, and occasionally a new reference work. But this was new for me when I first saw this book on the advanced list from Interweave F&W. I thought, oh, I don't know, because I don't really know anything about dyeing. I don't dye my own yarn. I don't spin. It is my husband's worst nightmare that I would actually start making my own yarn on top of my personal life, beyond life expectancy stash. And so I was interested to get the book, and I was shocked. It really, even for people who don't dye, and I will say that now I actually really want to dye yarn. People who don't dye yarn and people who don't spin, anybody who knits with hand painted yarn, which I love hand painted yarn, anybody who knits with hand painted yarn, I mean, this is a really fantastic book, Felicia, just for the information, so you understand the yarn better, and you understand how to knit with it better, and how to create different effects with it better. It's really a brilliant book. So I want to welcome you to the party line, Felicia Lo of Sweet Georgia.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me today.
Yeah, this is really an amazing book, and I know you have a lot of fans of your yarn out there. But tell me how the idea for this book came about, because it's really kind of like all your secrets in one place.
There are no secrets. There are no secrets to hand dyeing yarn, actually. So yeah, for years and years now, I've been wanting to write a book. I know that I love photography, I love the yarn, I love the colors, I love blogging and writing about what I'm doing. I like writing about the process, and I liked all these things. And I was just trying to figure out for the longest time, well, what could I ever write about? And so I had been approached by other publishers in the past, but it wasn't kind of like the culmination of the right time and the right place. And at one point I was asked by a publisher, but I had a baby or I was pregnant or something like that. And so I was like, oh, this is not the right time. And kept thinking, what am I going to write about? And then all of a sudden, when it became sort of the right time, the right conditions, the right circumstances, and everything, I got approached by acquisitions editor Carrie Bogert at Interweave. She has a different title now. She's doing different things, but she was the acquisitions editor at the time, and she came to me and said, this is really what I see you writing about. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's exactly what I could write about. And so all of a sudden, all the pieces of the puzzle fell into place and all became very, very clear that this is exactly what I should be writing about, which is basically sharing with people my story of color, my love for color theory, my appreciation for all of these things, and then a lot of dye application techniques and sort of showing people all the variety and the possibilities with hand dyed yarn. And we've all come over the years to appreciate hand-dyed yarn, and you see beautiful pictures online from other people and their blogs and Instagram and all these kinds of things. But I think what I hopefully have done is broken it down to a very, very understandable, very accessible format. And yeah, hoping that people will sort of not be intimidated by the techniques anymore and by the equipment, and maybe just give it a try. But I think, like what you were saying, I think you had taken a workshop in learning how to dye yarn, and you're never necessarily going to do this at any sort of scale, but it also allows you to appreciate how these things are made.
Yeah, and I think too, I really never thought about, although, I appreciate hand dyed yarn. I love going into places that do hand dyed yarn and wandering around and looking at all the amazing color combinations and things you might not have normally put together and how it makes it work. And I love knitting with it because essentially it does, you can knit stockinette. It does the work for you because it creates all that beautiful color and vibrancy without you having to really, work at it. So, which is nice because people like you take care of making sure people like me can get all the benefit while, not having to do all the work, which is awesome. But I don't think I really truly appreciated the difference between, the long continuous parts of color versus shorter continuous parts of color versus, it's like all the different ways that the color is applied to create different lengths of yarn in that color so that it totally changes. It changes what the end product is, but it really can change what you choose for different kinds of projects. And I think that's what's really cool about this is it just gave me even a deeper understanding of, when I go into a yarn shop or I'm looking at indie hand dyed yarn online, really the kind of project I want to use it for. And I think
Mhm.
that in and of itself, even if you're never going to dye yarn, if you're never going to spin, just understanding that I think will really increase the enjoyment of the end product when you knit with it. So that was really interesting for me, just even that portion of the book. And of course, the fact that you have some really gorgeous patterns at the end that kind of show off hand dyed yarns, didn't hurt.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that that's always the question that I get from people is how is this going to knit up? And that's the thing. It all depends. It depends on so many variables. And so this is part of the reason why, like I say, there's no secrets. And maybe it's because part of my background is I studied pharmaceutical science when I was in university. So I have this kind of science background. And then after university, I went to art school. So I have both a science and creative and all this kind of stuff. And so I like knowing why things happen. I know that like if color length is really, really long, it's going to produce stripes in certain circumstances, or if colors are very, very short, they're going to produce dots in other circumstances. And so these things are not secrets, really. It's just about trying to manipulate the yarn in order to produce the effect that you want. And so if you go all the way to the beginning where you dye your own yarn or you create your own skeins to the right length that you want, you can control exactly what the end product is going to be like in your knitted project, right? If you want to make stripes, you can make it. If you want to make it solid, you can make it. If you want to make it speckled looking, you can do that. So that's where you have control over the entire process. But if you just want to jump in and then buy your indie hand dyed yarn, you can have a better appreciation of looking at that skein. What is that potentially going to do when you knit it? What is it going to do if you knit it on 60 stitches for a sock versus if you're going to knit it into a shawl pattern versus if you're going to knit it into a sweater? What is it going to do for the sleeves versus the body? Like all of these kinds of things are going to look different depending on all the decisions that you make along the way.
Yeah, it's kind of like the perfect mix of like the right and left side of your brain. Because you're using both the creative and the analytical side at the same time. I think we should jump right in and do a little preview of what people can expect to find in this book. Now, this is like a hefty full size book. This is not a pamphlet, so I'm giving people here just kind of a little preview of the topics that are covered, but there's so much in this book, and I will admit it did make me want to dye yarn, uh, and I'm just kind of figuring out how I'm gonna break that to my husband. But anyway, I love color. I love to experiment with color. I love color work. I I like putting together things that should not be able to work, and they do. So I think this is the piece I think that maybe scares people the most is the whole thing of putting together colors. And yarn store owners tell me all the time that that people want to knit patterns that other people have designed in exactly the same color that they see it on the photograph, because they're like scared to change the color. So, which,
Hmm.
I think this section of the book, I think for all knitters everywhere, or crocheters, is, I mean, can really empower them to kind of step outside what somebody else chose. And generally, if it was in a magazine or a book, someone looked at the color palette for that story and came up with that idea, is that you can tell your own story by changing the color. So what can people
Hmm.
expect to really find in this section of the book?
Basically, we go over the absolutely fundamental basics of color theory. How is color formed in your eye? How do you perceive color? And then looking at color harmonies and how are colors arranged around the color wheel. So yeah, and the in the screenshots that you have here showing different color harmonies, whether something's monochromatic or analogous or complementary colorway, all of those kinds of fundamental classic color combinations. And I just suggest these as starting off points for choosing your own colors. Um, a lot of people are mm, a lot of people not shy away from color theory, but some people have very like violent reactions to the idea of color theory because uh, people don't like rules. People don't want to conform to any rules, but I'm not asking anybody to conform to rules. It's really about knowing the rules so that way you can form your own ideas on top of them. And these rules aren't really rules. They're just principles of how colors affect us and how colors make you feel. So things like complementary colors are by nature going to be higher contrast. So by nature, they're going to cause a little bit more tension, a little bit more energy. They're not going to be calming, relaxing color combinations. So these are not rules. It's kind of just the nature of how color happens.
Yeah, and I think, the thing too is, if it's kind of your first foray into putting colors together, if you're using the rules, that where things work because of how they're arranged on the color wheel, is that, if you follow the guidelines on any of the standard ones, it's going to look great. So it kind of takes the, oh my God, worry out of it. Is like, can these colors really work together? And because I mean, you look at these sections of colors, and I mean, any of those would make in those first two panels, those are ones that follow the rules. And then that last group, and actually, let me see if I can push. Does this one pull together? That these are the unapologetic and unexpected, where
Hmm.
these are not within the rules, but I mean, look how gorgeous they are. So it just shows that sometimes stepping outside the lines can create something really, really spectacular as well. But if it's your first time out, you got some things to you got some basic rules to work with. Yeah, and Denise says, yeah, these
Hmm.
are really nice, which, yeah, I mean, I would love sweaters in any of these.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a very popular pattern out right now called Find Your Fade, written by Andrea Maury. Andrea Renee Knits. You guys can find it. Find Your Fade. Is anybody knitting this pattern right now? But it's basically a shawl that goes from corner to, it's an asymmetrical shawl that goes from one side to the other, and it uses 7 different colors. So picking like one or two colors for a shawl is already, stressful enough, let alone having to pick 7 colors for a shawl. And so if you started with, a palette like any one of these, you have 5 or 6 different colors to play with. And then you can start to tweak and, use one of these as a fundamental foundation for the colors. It hopefully will make the process a little bit less stressful.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely, because knitting is supposed to be relaxing, and the thing I love about using multiple colors is watching the pattern develop as you go. And I think that's kind of the cool thing about the hand paints, where it's not so much a like a monochrome kind of. yarn itself is watching what comes next. And I find that I knit faster because I can't wait to see what comes up next and how it looks next to what's below it. So
Hmm.
that's kind of the, yeah, using multiple colors is just such an easy way to, as opposed to, stranded and intarsia knitting. So yeah, and Mary S's color theory is an excellent way to start this book. So hopefully people will get just reading this section of the book, I think is very empowering to, the the uh, the creative side of your brain and kind of letting go a little bit. So, and then
Hmm.
the second part is creating color, including really like how to set up space and equipment so that so hopefully that you can actually still use your kitchen, still cook occasionally with something other than your microwave. All the good things that go with that. But it's so it starts with that, like the nuts and bolts. I mean, and for people who like live in apartments or in small spaces, does that mean they shouldn't dye their own yarn?
No, not at all. I have dyed in a whole bunch of different kinds of settings, including it was like a tiny, tiny, tiny little basement space with no windows. And I used a tiny, tiny, tiny little bathroom that we used to rent out to tenants, and then I took back and started to use it. And so you don't need that much space. You need some access to water, and you just need someplace safe to dye. And so what I mean by safe is um, the dyes that you work with for this particular book, for the acid dyes, they're very, very fine powder. And so the most stressful part of dyeing, I think, is really mixing that fine powder. So if you can find a way to mix that dye powder without the powder flying all over the place, that's basically what you kind of need. But
Yeah.
otherwise, space-wise, you just need a surface to put your yarn on or whatever, and then some access to water and some access to power so you can heat it up.
Yeah. So you probably don't want your work table to be directly underneath the ceiling fan with the fan running.
No.
No, not so much. Not so much. So, but this section of the book actually talks about kind of the different techniques. And I just pulled like a couple things out because you cover so many techniques in here that, you know, I had no idea that there were so many different ways. Like this one that's on that we're looking at here. I mean, you could do it in a tub on the counter, or you could do it in a stainless steel sink. And so this was just one of the techniques. And I also love that you give people some guidelines. Like this shows if you're going to do a 4-color yarn, like this is how you calculate what
Yeah,
you
Mm-hmm.
do. So now your
Mm-hmm.
first yarn that you hand dyed yourself.
I can't pause this live.
Hang on, I'm going to mute Candy because we're hearing her. So when you were first like the first batch of yarn you ever dyed, did you dye it on a pot on your stove or in your kitchen sink?
The very first thing I ever dyed was with Kool-Aid, and I used fiber, spinning fiber, and it turned out okay. But I had followed some guidelines where I saw on the Yarn Harlot's blog that she had dyed fiber and she stuffed all of the roving into a length of pantyhose in order to keep all the fiber together. So that's what I did. And I ended up realizing that the pantyhose was not necessary to the process. So but I had, dyed this fiber with the Kool-Aid and I really, really had a good time doing it, really, really enjoyed it. And so I was immediately hooked and went out
Uh-oh.
and bought professional acid dyes, got myself an electric turkey roaster, got all these things. Um, and very quickly started doing other kinds of dyeing, but on fiber first, and then gradually moved to yarn.
Yeah. And I'm getting somebody talking in the background. I have everybody off except for you and me, Felicia.
I don't know if it all came from VHF. I can't tell you. I don't know.
Huh.
There's greater detail on my tabs
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
somebody who's in that is somehow getting sound. So if you happen to have just said there's greater detail on my tablet, it's you. And if you could perhaps shut off your audio, that would be great because I don't see it on my control panel. Thanks. So, yeah. And so, I didn't really think about the fact that some fiber is immersed and some fiber is actually painted, and how that kind of impacts what the end result is. But I think for the hand paintings, you get a lot more control that way.
Absolutely. So because you're not adding any additional water, so there's no place for the dye to migrate to. So really, wherever you pour or paint the dye, it's going to sort of stay in that area. So yeah, you can have absolute control over where all that stuff goes.
And I know in this screen on the left hand side, we see both spinning fiber and sock yarn using that same colorway, which is
Mhm.
so beautiful. And what's nice is you give a lot of your own personal tips of things that you've learned, I suspect the hard way, um, through your dyeing journey here. And I think, and I put this little part in about self-striping yarn because I think like the self-striping socks seems to be where I see most of that yarn that's basically designed for that small tube to create those
Mhm.
socks. And and I know sock knitters are a rabid bunch to start with. And I think for sock knitters, actually dyeing your own sock yarn has got to be the next step because yeah,
Mhm.
they all become addicted anyway, so you might as well spread it. So, but
Mhm.
this is yeah, so this
No,
is
I
really
remember like
go ahead.
yeah, the very first time I knit socks, I knit with a pair. Well, it was a self patterning yarn by
Oh
Regia,
yeah, that
and
engineered
it's the
yarn.
commercially printed one. Yeah, a commercially printed one. And I just found it totally fascinating. Like you knit two stitches and you get a gray dot, and then you knit two stitches and then you get a white dot, and then you knit and then you get stripes. And I was like, whoa, that's amazing. And then
I
I
felt
was
the same way.
really,
I was like, how the hell do they do this? Yeah.
yeah. So then if you're able to make that yourself through dyeing it yourself, that's really, really exciting, but it is an extremely labor intensive process. So I know that there are some indie hand dyers out there who specialize in making self-striping hand dyed yarn, and I just kudos to them because it is amazing and it's so much work. And so, yeah, absolutely, people should really have a very, very deep appreciation for these people who make this beautiful yarn.
Yeah. And what's nice then is you can knit a simple stockinette sock and have it look that gorgeous. So God bless them because I mean, for me, knitting socks is enough work without having to,
Yeah.
yeah, to like try to run four colors up in stripes. So God bless them. So,
It is amazing what we have available to us in yarn. It's amazing what people are making out there.
yeah, and it's what I learned how to knit like a lot of people. Like I just turned 60. I learned how to knit when I was in junior high school. The lady of the local yarn store taught me, and the big thing then that had just come out was like those neon colors of acrylic, and they were like so scratchy. They were not fun to knit with, but it's the 60s, right? So when I took up knitting again 8, 9 years ago, and the first time I walked into a yarn store, I was blown away. And that was really before the hand crafting, hand dyeing, hand dyed yarn became, as popular. But just the fibers we have available to us, the colors we have available to us, and now all this custom crafted yarn is just it's an embarrassment of riches.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
amazing. And
Hmm.
so I know all of us knitters are grateful to people like you, Felicia, who have just created these just stunning tools for us to create hand knits. It really increases the pleasure dramatically. And then for people who aren't happy just dyeing yarn and they want to spin the yarn, so they want to dye the fiber and then spin the yarn, there's a whole section in the book here as well as different ways to basically to create different things from hand dyed fiber. And I found, and there's so much in this book about it, but I found this really fascinating where you show, like this hank of the dyed fiber before you do anything to it. And then all by doing different things to it, how you create these different fabrics. And there are sections in the book that show, what happens when you use a long staple versus a short staple of color and how to make ombre yarns. And, you know, honestly, if I had the room for it, and I see your spinning wheel behind you there, if I had the room for it and probably the patience for it at this point in my life, yeah, I mean, talk about getting exactly what you want, from the fiber to the colors to how the colors are put together to the texture. Yeah, it's really, really, it's kind of crazy that people actually could do this at home. Oh, and Denise has a question. She wants to know your favorite method to dye yarn and why.
Hmm. That's a good question. I guess it all depends. It all depends on what result you're looking for. And so, like, I have lots of favorite dye application techniques. I like doing that low water immersion dyeing right now because it's super easy and it's super fun. And I like the effect that it produces, but I also like making semi-solid yarns that are layered and have multiple layers of color to them. Yeah, it just all depends on the kind of effect that you're looking for and ultimately what you're going to make out of it. So right now, a lot of the stuff that I'm focusing on is working with weaving, working with these yarns and weaving them. And so I'm kind of interested in seeing what these different techniques result in when I weave them up. Because I've knit a lot of these yarns, obviously, and so I'm really comfortable with how they're going to look when I knit them. And so now I'm just really curious about how they're all going to work when I weave them.
Oh my gosh. So, do you have a giant weaving loom in your house too?
I do. I have two.
Oh my God. Well, um, yeah, I'm just thinking how I would ever explain that. The spinning would
No,
be
I
bad.
think it's when you get hit by the fiber bug, I feel like it avalanches, right? You like knitting, and then as soon as you take that one step into learning how to spin your own yarn, because then you start to know how yarn is constructed, you have a better idea of what yarns you want to buy, you have an idea of how you want to design your yarn to better handle whatever it's going to become, so you can make your yarn so that it doesn't pill. You can make your yarn so it's super soft, or you can make your yarn so it's super strong. Like you have control over all these aspects. So once you realize that when you start to spin, then you have to learn how to dye fiber because fiber generally comes white unless you're going to buy somebody else's hand dyed stuff. So you'll learn to dye and then you'll make so much yarn, like my weaving teacher told me, that once you start making all this yarn, you have to find a way to use it. And weaving uses up yarn so much faster than knitting. And so then you kind of dip your toe into weaving rigid heddle looms, and then you start to get into like 4-shaft looms or 8-shaft looms, and then it all snowballs, which is why I ended up with all this stuff because you just can't you just can't stop.
So spinning is the gateway drug, is what you're saying.
it I feel like that it is, yes.
Oh, funny. Yeah, and Tracy took your class on color spinning and said it saved her so much frustration when she first started. And I think you have a craftsy class on that, if I'm not
I
mistaken,
do.
which I'll show people that in a little bit. So, and Roxy asked, do you do much with non-woolies? She says she knows different dyes are used, but some people have wool allergies, which my sister's got the same problem. She can't wear wool, which is so
Absolutely.
sad.
So, um, I love silk And so I know a lot of people who have wool allergies, they could work with silk. So we have a 100% silk yarn that we're working with, but it's more like a weaving yarn. It's very, very fine. And so you could use it for lace knitting if you wanted to, but that's 100% silk. And then also this spring for Sweet Georgia, we're coming out with another yarn that is a linen and silk blend.
Ooh,
And so we're still continuing to use the same yarns that we use. This might be great for, people who are living in warmer climates, something a little bit cooler. But the acid dyes that we use, they bind to protein fibers. So they will bind to the silk in that blend, but it won't bind to the linen. And so it creates a very, very interesting effect where the silk picks up the color, but the linen stays its own natural color.
wow. So yeah, and Betty says, do you dye colored fibers, gray, brown, etc.? And if you do, does it affect the
Mhm.
colorways you choose?
So absolutely. So we have about 140 different colorways right now, and generally we dye on yarns that are ecru or cream or close to white in order to have color purity that is recognizable. So like if it's going to be yellow and it's going to be that lemon curd yellow, everybody kind of expects it to be lemon curd yellow. They don't expect it to be ochre or brown or anything like that. So we do dye on those gray, brown, mixed colored fibers when we do our club yarns. So every month we dye a unique colorway, and sometimes we'll do it on uh, alpaca, or we've done it on yak, or those kinds of fibers that already have a natural color to them. And they come out amazing. They're just naturally more earthy. They're more rich. They have beautiful depth of color. They're typically much warmer. Um, this past fall for Spinzilla, we dyed a custom colorway called Tea Leaves, and we dyed some of it on our regular, like a superwash merino and nylon blend, so it looks very, very clear, and the colors are really vibrant and bright. And then we also dyed it on this merino silk and yak blend, which is just so lovely. It was just sumptuous. I think the word is sumptuous. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, and I'm great. I'm glad you're coming out with a linen and silk because some of us live in places that it just doesn't get
Yeah.
cold enough to wear a sweater. And I think here in Florida this year, I mean, it's still 80 in the 80s. You know, we've had like 2 days that dropped into the 60s,
Hmm.
and that's pretty much it. I think winter's gone for us, and the lighter natural fibers, are kind of a year-round thing for us here. So, and I love
Hmm.
linen. It just gets softer and softer as you wash it. It's awesome. And then the silk will give it just that perfect sheen and
Hmm.
satiny
Exactly.
finish. And I want to squeeze some right now. So it's terrible, isn't it? It is really an addiction. B asks, is there a shelf life to the dye powder? She purchased some years ago intending to try dyeing, but never did. Oh, I feel you there, B, because I do the same
Hmm.
thing.
Hmm.
She says she still has the dyes. Can they be used now?
I believe for the acid dyes, yeah, you can absolutely still use them right now.
Well, there you
Yeah,
go.
acid dyes work. You can just mix it up in solution. It might not be exactly the same as if you were to order that same dye again and start to use it. The colors might shift or change a little bit, but they should be absolutely usable still. I think there's a difference if you were using Procyon dyes, which is the dyes that are specifically used for cellulose fibers. I know that Procyon dye, it can like bind with the air. And so a lot of times if your Procyon dye has been sitting around for a long time, and you try to use that, it won't be as active as it was previously. But yeah, with your acid dyes, it should be okay.
Oh, there you have it. So drag them out. It's time. So
You can do it.
and then this section was great. I love that you this because and I kind of have the same problem when I'm looking at hand dyed yarns and kind of trying to figure out what to do to make them really, show off their stuff. And I think in the ones that are more, kind of the tone on tone, it's a little easier because you can do cables and all kinds of stuff in it, and it doesn't kind of muck up the color ways. But
Hmm.
when it's the self striping or the shorter lengths of color, unless I'm making socks, which I don't do very often because I don't wear them because I live in the South, but the
Hmm.
is like, where to use them. And it's so weird because I looked at this one page and I thought, well, crap, I mean, it would seem like an obviously good way to use it, but you talk about how you can create a sense of motion and really kind of choosing stitches that that take advantage of that, which it just never even occurred to me. Do you have some other tips? Like, because I know, we all have yarn in our stashes. I've actually only ever spoken to 2 people who only have the yarn for the project they're currently working on. Which it's hard to trust people like that. I don't know. There's something wrong, but everybody else, you see this beautiful yarn, you're, in a store, or you're at a, at a fiber fair or something, and you see this gorgeous hand dyed yarn, and you buy it because it's beautiful and it feels so good. And then you take it home and you're like, well, what the heck do I do with it? And the whole idea of just like creating that sense of motion and utilizing that, I mean, I think can be a little overwhelming.
So I think what I wanted to illustrate here was that like a high contrast, variegated colorway sometimes can be a little bit stressful to people. They're like, well, what am I going to make with it? And
Yeah.
so if you knit that up in a lace stitch pattern like it is in that feather and fan pattern, you
Yeah.
can see it completely obliterates the lace. Like you don't even know that lace is happening there anymore. You
Yeah.
just see
You can't even see
these
it.
waves of color. Whereas if you compare it to the row on the bottom where the color is a little bit more semi-solid, all of a sudden the lace comes forward and you see the texture, you see the shape of the lace. You don't see so much the color blocks. Whereas if you go back to that first highly contrasted colorway, you can use chevrons and create movement in those color blocks so that it doesn't have that pooling feeling that people are always very stressed out about. You can still use those colors, have those colors be present, but have it in a way that might be a little bit more appealing to you. So yeah, just basically using these sort of a high contrast, medium contrast, and low contrast colorway to show the difference in how they will knit up, and yeah, it might help spark some ideas for when you're working with your own project.
Yeah. I think, that was the thing when I looked at it, it was like, well, with the high contrast yarn in the feather and fan, I thought, well, that's a lot of lace knitting for, it's not a lot of bang for your buck, is the way I look at it. Is I want whatever work I did to show. If I'm doing lace, I want
Mm-hmm.
the lace to show. If I'm doing color work, I want the color to show. And I think that was the thing in the chevrons. When I looked at this, I thought, oh man, I did this big blanket for my mother in about 20 different yarns. And I'm thinking, damn, I should have just gotten a really good hand dyed. I could have saved myself all those ends. So, which, is the very cool thing about the hand dyed and self striping yarns, is the lack of ends to weave in at the end of it.
hmm
Tamara wants to know, are you going to do any dye classes either in the studio or in the Lower Mainland this year?
Yeah, so teaching live students is awesome and super fun, and I really, really, really super enjoyed it. This past fall, I taught at Vogue Knitting Live in Minnesota, and then again at New York just a couple weeks ago, and I really, really enjoy it. But I discovered that traveling to teach and bringing all the equipment and all the dyes and all the supplies and mixing dye powders in a hotel room, all of that kind of stuff is quite intense. And so, yeah, I think that what we're thinking that the best thing to do would be to actually host dye classes at our own studio in Vancouver in the Lower Mainland. And so we haven't got any dates set or anything like that yet, but I'm hoping that later on this year that might be something that we can put together because that just makes the most sense. All of our stuff is here, all of our yarn is here, all of our supplies are here, and we don't really have to go anywhere. And we have the facilities and we have all the stuff ready for people to cook with. And so it just seems like it makes the most sense to invite people to our studio rather than send me out with a whole bunch of boxes of burners and turkey
Oh my God.
roasters and
Yeah.
things
I mean,
like
that's
that.
one thing about knitting, is so portable, but
Yeah.
dyeing a little less so. Right. So,
Yeah.
or actually a lot less so. So we'll
I
have
mean,
to.
it does emphasize the point that you can dye anywhere, right? We were dyeing in a hotel boardroom a couple times, and it's possible to set up anywhere. It's just a lot of work.
Yeah, and I can imagine packing for those classes is an exercise in organization when you travel.
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I actually didn't expect to find patterns in this book, so that was a really nice surprise for me because honestly, I had so much information and there's so much of value in the book before you even get to the patterns. But I do want to thank you for tossing in some really nice patterns that kind of show off, how to use the yarns, but also show off the different kind of the techniques for dyeing that you show earlier. You see how those kind of interact when they're turned in to fabric. So can you tell us about these projects?
So the first cowl on the left is an infinity cowl, and it's done in it's how do I say it? It's kind of like welts. Yeah, it's welts. It's not ribbing, it's welts. And it's done with 9 ends of yarn. So basically, we took 4 balls of yarn, of sock yarn, and then you're basically making a center pull ball out of them, and then using the front end and the inside end, and you're holding them all together, and then another end of what we call silk mist, which is kind of like a Rowan Kid Silk Haze kind of yarn, like a mohair and silk lace, and so you're holding all those ends together and then knitting on big stitches to combine the colors and things like that. And I love it because it produces this sort of mélanger kind of effect, marled effect,
Yeah, it's
and it's
beautiful.
it's warm and beautiful. And yeah, that's one of my favorite things to do. And then the second one is the shawl in the middle, and that's also an asymmetrical shawl. So you start from one corner and then you knit until you basically run out of yarn. So it's a really, really easy way to just use one skein of hand-dyed yarn. And because it's an asymmetrical shape, every time you add a row, you're increasing stitches. And so you're constantly changing the number of stitches that you're working with, the width of your project. And so that is going to blend and shift the color sections as you're knitting. And so it can help mix up your colors a little bit more if you're worried about things like flashing and pooling and stuff like that in a hand-dyed yarn. So that's kind of the point of that one.
Yeah, and what
It
I
also is
love is
just
you can
really,
see the difference of what happens when you're like knitting solid fabric versus knitting open work with the
mm-hmm,
same yarn, and how that really changes the impact of the color, which I thought was just
mm-hmm,
interesting to see how that looks, juxtaposed against each other. It's just,
mm-hmm.
yeah. And then this third panel here I thought was really pretty, and I love shawls that aren't lace. I don't know why. I don't
Mm-hmm.
really live any place where that was going to make much of a difference. Although this would be a winter coat here this
So
year
this is
in
a,
Florida.
yeah, the one on the right-hand side, that Greta's kind of like wrapping herself in, that's a big blanket. It's actually a baby-sized blanket, but it's a big blanket. You could use it as a lap blanket for watching TV and all this kind of stuff. But it basically uses the idea of color blocking. So you pick 5 colors that you could work with in a color block style. And then this goes back to the color theory ideas, picking colors that work well together, and then there's also another option where you can use 3 different colors of sock yarn and hold it double and then create sort of a mixed mélange marled effect as well.
Yeah, so pretty. And with the hand-dyed semi-solid yarns, you don't get that sense of just heavy, thick kind of blocks of color because it still has movement within the color of that block, and it's really a beautiful way to use the semi-solid yarns, the semi-solid
Hmm.
dyes. It's so pretty. So yeah, it's amazing how that lightens up the look of that as opposed to just the machine made all one color solid kind of color thing. So really,
Hmm.
really pretty. And then of course you got to have some socks, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Yes, with some self-striping yarn. And I don't know why. I think it's because you see it like at the toe, how different stripe comes out than it does as it moves up the leg. Is it adding and working two balls as it goes up the leg, or why does that shift so much like that?
Oh, so this is the thing, right? Like tiny changes in your knitting can cause changes in how things are going to pool. So these socks are worked from the cuff down. So you just do your 2 by 2 ribbing at the beginning for like an inch, and then you're knitting 60, 64 stitches around. And so you can see in the leg section that there's quite a consistent appearance to how that yarn is pooling or appearing. And then when you reach the heel, then you start to shuffle things around because you know
Yeah.
you're working some stitches and not other stitches, and so it's kind of mixing up the sequence of how things are going to appear. And so then you continue down the foot, and down the foot it takes on that same appearance as in the leg again. And then when you start to decrease for the toes, because you're reducing the circumference or the number of stitches on your needles, then you're starting to produce a little bit more of a stronger stripe effect. And that's why the color gets stronger and stronger near the toes.
It's interesting because when I looked at that, I thought, well, that would make sense because you're working fewer stitches, but the change in this is so dramatic in how that
Mm-hmm.
looks. I thought, is she doing something different there? So,
No,
because
so that's why even if you're like you're knitting 60 stitches as opposed to 64 stitches, if you use a 2.25 millimeter needle instead of a 2 millimeter needle, like all of these tiny things can cause changes in how it all pools and appears. Even like my tension versus your tension, it's going to be different. So that's why it's always so challenging. People are like, "Oh, how's it going to knit up?" It's just it depends.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I occasionally get an email from somebody who's watched my online entrelot class and said, I want to do a blanket that's 40 by 60. How many stitches should I cast on? Well, there isn't an answer for that because everybody
Hmm.
knits differently. So, and depends on your yarn, and it depends on your needle size. It depends how tightly you knit. I said, you just got to knit a gauge swatch and do the math. I mean, there's things, everybody is a little different. And, yeah, there's no single answer to that question.
Hmm.
So, yeah. So, now the one next to it, this little shawlette is so sweet, and what a really nice little gift project to give
Hmm.
somebody, and especially with the hand dyed yarn, is that, I mean, it looks like a lot more work than it is.
Well,
I love gifts
that
like that where you can take credit for a lot of stuff you didn't do.
Oh no, you could do it right from the very beginning. So basically, we dyed the fiber, and then I spun it, and then I plied it into a Navajo chain ply, so that way all the colors stay really strong and really separate. So you can see purple is really purple, orange is really orange, and then because hand spun sometimes is so precious because you only have a little bit of it, I designed this shawl so basically you could maximize the use of this precious yarn. So you start with the lace section at the bottom, and you make sure that the lace is all done, and then using a crescent shawl sort of format, you just do the garter stitch part to use up all the rest of the yarn. So
And when you're out of yarn, you're
I worked
done.
on exactly. So I work all these shawl patterns so that way you can maximize the use of every inch of your yarn because, a lot of times we're making considerations because we're spinning and we're making hand spun. It's so precious and things like that. And you don't want to have a stressful situation where you run out of yarn and then you can't finish your project. So all of the shawls are designed so that way you can just, you can not have that stress.
Yeah, which is, and actually when I looked at that, I thought, oh, my husband bought me a ball of vicuna as a gift years ago, and I have it in a special little box, and I pet it every once in a while. But it's one ball, and when it's gone, it's gone. And this
Hmm.
project is actually perfect for those kind of projects where, like you have a ball of kiviat you got as a souvenir when you were in Alaska or something, right? So
Hmm.
where, yeah, and you need those projects where you can knit till the yarn is, however much yarn you have left is when you start to bind off. So yeah, so
Hmm.
that's I appreciate that you designed some of those projects because I think we all have that special ball of yarn that we've been saving, and that's a really great use for it, and a beautiful little accessory piece. And then I love this shawl that's next to it. The colors are so spectacular, and it really shows off one of the dyeing processes or dyeing techniques that you have in the book. And so
Mhm.
tell us about this project. It's so beautiful.
So this shawl is basically it's worked in a yarn called cash silk lace. So it's part cashmere and it's part silk, and then it was a hand painted. Well, it's two hand painted skeins in a colorway that we call cherry blossom. And so again, like one of the most stressful things for knitters is this idea that colors are going to pool and they're going to be ugly. But in this project, we made it a planned pooling project. So it took forever. It took forever to figure out exactly how many stitches was going to work. And so this project was delivered after the deadline for sure for the book. But just trying to work out exactly the right number of stitches in order to allow all those colors in the hand painted yarn to begin to stack on top of each other row after row after row and produce very, very solid, long, continuous blocks of color. So it doesn't look like it's streaking or doing anything funny. It just looks like it was painted that way almost.
Yeah.
Um, and
It actually looks like it was
all
painted after it was knit. I mean, it's
exactly,
yeah, it's
yeah.
beautiful.
But it's
Yeah.
all done with knitting, and thankfully I had an amazing, fabulous sample knitter, Anita, who helped me finish the knitting of this project because yeah, I was super behind.
Yeah, it's so pretty. And then here are some other projects that show off kind of different techniques in that are used in the dyeing. And then like that first project is also shows off kind of the semi-solids and in a
Hmm.
very pretty colorway, which is a whole nother part of the book. And then the one in the middle. So this has got to have some very, very long colorways in this and long
Yeah.
stretches of color. Tell us about this project because it is so pretty.
Yeah, so all these three projects that you have up on screen here, they are all different like variations on the idea of gradients or ombres. So the one on the left that is made with a Party of Five mini skein set that we make at Sweet Georgia. So that's a gradient where every skein is dyed a semi-solid color, but they're slightly different. So you've produced a gradient. And then the middle one is one where I hand painted a sock blank. So, or yeah, a sock blank, I guess that's what you call it. So basically, Teresa at the studio, she helped me take our yarn and knit it using her Addy Express, I think is what it's called. It's Addy produces a knitting machine, a circular knitting machine. And so she used our undyed yarn and knit a giant blank for me, which is a giant tube of undyed yarn. And then I hand painted that tube of yarn. And then when you unravel it and then reknit it, then you get this long gradient effect through the entire skein. So that's how we produce that one.
Yeah,
And this
it's
shawl
really
is knit
beautiful.
from side to side and just really maximizes the use of this long gradient colorway. And then the third one is also a gradient yarn, but that ombre yarn is produced through hand spinning.
Wow, so pretty. And then yeah, Roxy says one is more beautiful than the next, which I agree. It's
Yeah.
so pretty.
So that third project, that ginormous pie shawl is basically it's just a bump of spinning fiber that you could get, hand painted spinning fiber. And then our spinner, Vanessa, she broke all of the colors into different color piles. So, put all the blues in one section, put all the turquoise in another section, put all the yellows in one section, and then she'd spin um, sequentially. So she spin from the blue pile, all the blue pile, and then all the turquoise pile, and then all the green pile, and then all the yellow. And then finally, Navajo ply that entire thing to make a 3-ply yarn, continuous yarn, where the yarn goes from yellow all the way to blue. And so when you knit that, it produces this huge ombre effect.
Yeah, it's really, really
Yeah.
stunning. And not something that you could easily create from just switching up the colors as you go. I think that's the beauty of creating your own yarn is getting exactly what you need for your project. So that's just so
Yeah.
beautiful. What
So I
this
think this is one thing that I wanted to say about the patterns is that like while I was writing this book, I was pregnant and then I had my newborn while I was shooting all of these these photos for the book. All of these model shots are all shot with my baby. She was like a month old in the stroller next to me. And so I have to say that I have crazy baby brain for all of these things. Like all of the patterns, they might look a little bit complicated, but they're really not complicated because my brain couldn't handle complicated when I was writing this book. So even this last pie shawl, it's only 3 different lace stitch patterns, and the lace stitch patterns are actually very, very simple. And so it might look like it's really complex, but in fact, all of the stitch work, all of the knitting is really, really very, very easy. And a lot of the effects that are effects that are created through color and the application of color.
Well, good to know. So even if you're 8 months pregnant, your brain can still function through these projects.
You could still do it.
You can still do it. I think that's might be the highest standard ever, right? If you can do it on baby brain, then and then everybody else you should be able to do it with the TV on and drinking coffee and with your doorbell ringing. So hey, get over yourselves, right? Yeah, I mean that's amazing, but they're so beautiful, Felicia. And I mean, it was interesting when I was looking at them because I was thinking I could see like the techniques that were used to create the yarn and how that melded so perfectly with the design. And I think that there's I think there are lessons to be learned about what to do with hand painted yarn and different types of yarn, whether it's the long stretches of color or the short stretches of color. Just by looking at those projects and really giving yourself, because it really give you ideas of how you can best utilize the yarns. So I know people are going to want to keep track, especially of you in a non-stalker method, so that they know where you are and where you're teaching, and also where they can come or they can go squeeze some Sweet Georgia all for themselves. So if you go to sweetgeorgiayarns.com, you can keep track of where Felicia is and classes and all those good things. And then also on Craftsy, we were talking about your spinning dyed fibers class, which if you can't get to Felicia comes to you on your computer here. And I think Craftsy is running their big beginning of the year, learn something new sale on classes. So right now it's $19.99. So you should go add it to your cart and buy it before the price goes back up. And if you want to see what inspires Felicia, this is what I love about Pinterest and seeing what designers are looking at here, is that you see, especially the things with the color inspirations and things that move the designers. And Pinterest is awesome for that. I really love that. And then of course you can pin things to your own board that inspire you or repin them. Felicia Lo 8 on Instagram.
That one's not me.
Huh?
No, that one's not me.
Are you not you? Is this not you? Oh, sorry about that. You know what? I clicked the link on your website. I don't know how that came up.
That's weird.
Yeah.
Let me send this to you. So this is the Sweet Georgia one, and this is me.
There we go. Oh, that looks more like it.
So that's the one for Sweet Georgia. So that's all of our yarn. We did a photo shoot yesterday for our spring collection. So that's all coming up. I post about the podcast that I do. I do a podcast every Tuesday. It comes out on iTunes. And I talk with knitwear designers and all sorts of stuff like that. So I post about the podcasts, episodes that we do. We were recently at the CHA show with our trade show. And yeah, so you can follow all the Sweet Georgia stuff on there. And then I also have my own personal Instagram where I put all my baby stuff and what I'm weaving and what I'm working on, like personal projects that aren't super relevant to Sweet Georgia, because I used to put it all on the Sweet Georgia Instagram, and then I started to feel kind of weird about it.
Yeah, so there you go. So there's like 2 places to go. One for adorable baby pics and oh my God, weaving. And yeah, wow. Okay. Do you ever sleep? That is my next question. Do you sleep at all?
I sleep a lot.
Oh my God.
I can't function without sleep.
Yeah, you're just very efficient when you're awake, apparently. So Yeah, and did you you know, this is so beautiful. The colors of your baby sling there are just, it's stunning. What a cute little baby. So also you can follow Sweet Georgia on Sweet Georgia Yarns on Facebook. And yep, and here's oof, yeah, the weaving thing. And then for people who are on Ravelry, there Felicia has a designer page, which is oddly enough called Felicia Lo, and you can see projects here as well. Um, and then Felicia's also on um, Twitter, and oh my, I'm tired just thinking about it.
I know
Yeah,
it's
and
all
actually, Roxy
awesome.
says cutest baby ever, which I have to say, because my son won't listen to this, and he's 38, so he's no longer a baby. But yeah, I would agree, cutest baby ever, except for you, honey, in case he ever listens to this. So, you know, we're going to give away a book before we get off the air today. So, but if you don't, you know, there's two other places that you can get one. One is you can help support Planet Pearl and help us pay for things like the GoToMeeting app that we're using by going to the book link right there on Planet Pearl, and you'll see Dying to Spin and Knit right there. And then there's an Amazon link in the description right there, and you can use that. Or tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, you will see, I hate this new layout, on Facebook for administrative pages, but you will see starting at 8 o'clock tomorrow, there's also an opportunity to win a copy of the book on Facebook if you don't win today. So lots of chances and opportunities, and I am so glad to meet you, Felicia. You're such an inspiration, and I only wish that you were closer, because I have a sneaking suspicion that I would be taking every one of your dyeing workshops, and and maybe I would just take spinning classes, but not spin at home. So my husband didn't know what I was up to, but yeah, because he's pretty patient about, you know, when the yarn takes over the whole house, especially if I'm in the middle of working on a book and it's every horizontal surface in the house has something on it. But
Hmm.
yeah, it's really such a pleasure. I'm so glad you took time out today to come and chat with us and give us our own personal preview of your book, which is it's really I really belongs as a reference, I think, on every knitter's bookshelf. So I know it's going to be massively popular. And yeah, so you're getting much love, much love in the room, which is awesome.
Thank
And
you.
now, are you working on a follow up?
Um, I have ideas. I have ideas. It's just a matter of like working them out ahead of time. But yeah,
Yeah.
hopefully.
Okay, so it didn't
Yeah.
put you off books altogether, doing books altogether.
No, but the process is absolutely fascinating. So yeah, I'm interested. Yeah.
Yeah, I think unless you've actually done a book, I think it's hard to appreciate how much it takes over your life in the process.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so I'm not going to push for a second book, but I'm just saying I would love a second book. So they're just from me to you, that's it. So, yeah, Betsy says she took the class with you at VK Live and promptly went out and bought the book. She said, great
Woohoo!
class, loved the
Yay.
book. So yeah, so it's really awesome. So now everybody do not go away, because I'm about to give away a book. Felicia's gonna give me the magic number, and she'll pick a magic number, and I'll give away a copy of the book. And then I think we had the next couple of authors that are coming are both crochet designers. So we're kind of getting everything this spring, not just knitting, and which is a lot of fun for me as well. So if you haven't signed up for the newsletter for the upcoming events, make sure you do that. You can go to the event page on Planet Pearl, and there's a place to sign up there. And of course, it's always posted up on the Facebook page as well, so you can keep track. And Facebook has changed um, their set up again. So if you want to make sure that you get notified of the giveaways and events, make sure you go to your settings and tell it to show you PlanetPurl first, or you may not even know there was a giveaway until it's gone. So I don't know. It's Facebook. What can I say? So, so thanks everyone for coming today. Hang on, and I'm going to stop the recording, and we're going to give away a book. If you missed any part, come back and watch it on YouTube. Thanks, everyone.